In real life, though, what we're looking to do is just to make small tweaks and changes over a period of time to literally train a behavior and become more and more open to being able to make these changes. And so you can actually just use our natural suggestibility, and it's interesting, people say it's terrifying how suggestible we are, but actually the more suggestible you are, the more likely you are to learn, the more likely you are to improve, the bigger facility you've got to like take steps forward. If you're not suggestible and you're not open at all, and you're really not looking to do all that, actually change is much more difficult. So I think being suggestible is a really good thing if what we want to do is to step forward.
Hi, I'm the self-development coach, Johnny Lawrence, and welcome to the Self-Development Podcast. Today, I'm going to be speaking to a hypnotist. So I'm really quite excited about this one. This is my childhood dream panning out, where I get to ask all the questions to a hypnotist. It's like if I got to speak to a magician, I think. It'd be the same sort of thing. But today I'll be speaking to Rob Temple. Rob is a stage hypnotist obsessed with human psychology and what makes us think, act, and feel and behave the way that we do. He's not a psychologist, a scientist, a life coach, or an academic. He hasn't got a degree, hasn't written a single book, and doesn't treat clients. But over an 18-year career as an entertainer, he's hypnotized over 20,000 people around the world and has uncovered the real in-field magic behind thoughts, emotions, and mindset. Rob is on a mission to help regular people just like him understand how a single idea planted like a seed in our mind can grow and flourish into something powerful to change your life and become the very best version of yourself. How are you today, Rob?
I'm good, mate. Thank you for having me. This is lovely. And to say you're very excited for your childhood dream to meet a hypnotist, like if it was David Beckham or something, then that would be more standard by most childhood dreams. But I'll take it.
Well, you know, I loved like magic, hypnotism, all that sort of thing growing up. And, you know, it's a real sort of behind the curtain moment for me. I get to ask them questions that I've always wanted to know the answers to. But I mean, how are you today, mate? How's your day been?
Yeah, really good. Very, very good. Had some iffy internet this morning, but it seems to be holding out now. So fingers crossed.
That's good. So stand by if there's any sort of long pauses, anybody. So
yeah.
I'm really glad to have you on. And as I said, it's a real opportunity for me to speak to somebody a little bit different on the show. I've never had a hypnotist on here before. What I love is the real like obvious connection with sort of self-development that you have. Like you seem to have a real like passion for it and a sort of, you know, an interest in it. And I'm sure that's led you to discover many, many things across your career. So if you could just tell people a bit about yourself and your journey so far, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, of course. So I'm 34 at this point in my life, and I've never had a job. I've never worked for anyone else, and I've never been on a job interview. I've never poured a coffee. I've never done any of those things. I've just always worked for myself. And that was a big driver for me for my entire life. And that sort of was born out of the fact that I was a kid growing up who was very out of place, super shy. I am a real, probably an introvert at heart, although I came across this term ambivert recently, which is sort of a bit of both. And I guess that probably is more me because I like doing stuff like this and doing my show, but most of the time quite introverted. Very shy, very quiet as a kid, like would hide behind my mum's leg if a stranger came to the door or anything. And didn't make friends very easily, didn't fit in very easily. I was born in North London, lived there till I was about 5 or 6, and then moved up to the Northeast for my dad's work. And again, I was suddenly thrust into a different place, a new environment to not fit in. And I think looking back, I mean, I was so young, but I didn't fit in the school I went to in North London. I didn't really feel like I fit in the primary school that I moved to in the Northeast either. I just found that quite difficult. I wasn't unpopular. I didn't get bullied. I didn't really get picked on very much. I just didn't thrive and flourish and make loads of friends. And you can't help, I think, under those circumstances, whether you realize it or not as a kid, but to internalize that and think, well, that must be me then, because it can't be the kids around me because it's happened in completely different parts of the country. It must be me. And so when I was a kid, one of the things that happened was I saw a magician do a kids' party, and I was just obsessed with this idea of this guy who would stand there with everybody aghast and amazed staring at him. And I thought, oh wow, that's cool. And like the applause and the laughter and all of that stuff. And I actually started to do magic as a kid. That's how I got into entertainment originally. And then growing up, eventually I saw a hypnotist when I was about 14, thought that was cool, decided I wanted to pursue that. So my dad paid the hypnotist to teach me how to do it. So I sort of took that on as a new career line whilst doing my schoolwork.
That must have been amazing. Sorry. That must have been amazing.
It was a strange time doing like kids party magic and then hypnosis shows in pubs in the evening and that kind of thing. And just sort of learning my craft really. And I knew that that was all I ever wanted to do. And when I got to the end of my A levels, so I was 18, my dad said, don't go to university, take a gap year, see how this entertainment thing pans out. And then if it doesn't work, you've got your A levels. That's like the hard bit now. You can come back to university in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s if you had to. So that seemed fair enough. And I didn't want to move to another place and not fit in. Like I'd managed to get my way through school and I was happy. I was lucky. I went to a good school surrounded by good people, but again, felt like the oddball. And so university felt like I'd be hurled into another place where I'd find it hard to fit in. And so I pursued this entertainment thing and I've done it ever since. But one of the battles that I've had with that along the way growing up was not fitting in, feeling this real innate lack of confidence and not being like everybody else and not being good enough. Having to overcome that in order to pursue a career in entertainment. And then basically what happened was over the years of doing my show, I couldn't help but notice that you take these really ordinary, and if you've never seen a hypnosis show before, because they're not particularly in vogue these days, it's a little dated, there's not many of us left. But if you take random people from the audience who volunteer, you get them on stage, they get hypnotized and then right in front of you, and then transform into the absolute life and soul of the party. And one of the things I heard over and over and over and over again after gigs was people would come up and they'd say, I didn't believe in it. But then my friend Johnny got up there and he would never dance around like Elvis, but he did. Like, even if he was drunk on a stag do, he still wouldn't get up and do what he did on that stage. And they were amazed by that. And so that started to like percolate in my brain. And I was thinking, this is making short-lived transformations in people's lives. People get up there and for the next 3.5 minutes, as long as that track plays, they are Elvis or Madonna or whatever. And so I started to realize that actually, if everything that I've been through on my journey was all about changing beliefs about myself and changing thoughts about myself, and now getting to the point where actually I feel very confident and I feel really good and happy and fulfilled, and I wake up every day with a bit of a spring in my step, that's only happened by programming beliefs and thoughts. And so I started to dig into it years ago and started to read everything I could about personal development and self-improvement, and started to then look at what I did on stage every night, hypnotizing people and making them act out their imagination, made me realize, God, if you can create beliefs, well, first of all, if you can create beliefs that fast, even if they're short-lived, that shows you just how powerful what we've got inside our heads can be. But then if we start to understand actually what's actually going on underneath the showbiz and the pizzazz, is that something we can apply in our everyday life with or without formal hypnosis? Can we apply that stuff? And so I've just become obsessed with it ever since. And now I still perform my show, but I also go and ramble about stuff like this.
Oh, that's what an amazing story. Wow. Yeah. Kind of taken aback by that. I mean, you must have seen some pretty, what do you think the most surprising thing you've ever seen on stage is? Like you obviously hypnotize somebody, and what's the
one of the most bizarre, it's a hard question to answer. It's a bit like saying, what's your favorite song or your favorite film?
Yeah,
one of the most crazy things I've ever come across was when I was 18, I got the chance to go to Greece and do like summer seasons for drunk British tourists going on holiday. And there was this middle-aged couple came to see my show every night. They were on holiday for 2 weeks, and I did 6 shows in this particular resort over those 2 weeks, 3 a week. And they came to see all 6 of them. And every time they would say, oh, can we buy you a drink? That was great. And I'd say, yeah, thank you. So they buy me a drink and we'd sit down and chat. And I was only 18, 19. And they were chatting away about the fact that they thought it's really entertaining, really funny. They had a great time, but we don't think it's real. They said, we think they're just, they're acting, they're playing along. They didn't think I'd hired actors because they've seen the show 6 times. And obviously it's different people on stage every night, but they did think, or 5 times at this point, but they did think that it was, just people playing along. So I said, well, look, my job here isn't to convince you. I just want you to have a good time. You've had a good time. Thank you for the drink. Let's just chat. And then for the last time, just before they went home, they came and said, actually, the only way this is going to work is if Sharon actually gets up and takes part. And I said, okay, I mean, it probably won't work because you're probably going to fight against it, but feel free. Like, I'm not going to say no. So I did the show, and Sharon gets up and she sits there and takes part in everything. And she gets hypnotized the deepest, the quickest, and becomes what we classify as the star of that show. Like, every show has one person who's like the larger than life star of the show. So we went through it, and I always used to film every show, a bit like when you go on the roller coaster, you can buy the overpriced picture of yourself screaming. Well, we used to sell that. If people wanted to, they could go and get it burnt onto a DVD and take it home with them for 20 euros. So we do that. And that was that. And they came up to me at the end, and she was completely unaware that anything had happened. For her, she'd got up, sat down, the show hadn't worked, and I'd sent everybody back to their seat. That was like her memory of what had happened in this 2 hours. And the guy was laughing his head off, saying, you were doing this and you were doing that. And she's saying, shut up, just thinking that we were winding her up. Anyway, so they took the DVD home, they left, and they flew home that following night. And they're actually very kind. They just gave me whatever euros they had left as a tip. They just said, you've been a big part of our holiday. Thank you very much. We're not going to change this 200 euros or whatever back. So have it. And off they went and went home. And that was that. And then a couple of weeks later, I got an email from the guy or a Facebook message through my Facebook page. And he said they got home, Sharon watched the DVD, and she was convinced it was obviously terrible quality in terms of its filming. I mean, talking a long time ago, a terrible camera perched on a bar. And she said they've watched it and she just thinks it's somebody, and we've pranked the whole thing. We've got somebody with similar hair wearing the same sort of, white top and black trousers just to play along and be her. And looking back on it weeks later, she was still convinced that she hadn't done any of the things that she'd done, which is just mind blowing, even to me. That's mind blowing. So that was probably one of the most remarkable things that shows you the power of this stuff, I think.
Yeah. I mean, to actually think when you see a video of yourself doing it, to think that you'd go to that degree because you're that convinced that you didn't get up on stage. That's amazing. Yeah. That's absolutely amazing. I mean, okay. So how does hypnotism work?
So I think this is a really important question.
Yeah.
If we want to start to factor in how our brains work and how we are behaviorally, that's a hard word to say, and what we can do about it. So the quickest way to describe it is think of your mind as having two parts to it. You've got your conscious mind and your unconscious mind. And you'll have heard of these phrases all the time, but the conscious mind effectively is the brain, it's the mind, it's the little voice in your head, the voice that you think of as me. So when you're wandering around talking to yourself, as we all do all day long, every day, people listening to this right now will be talking back at us in their own head. And that voice is your conscious mind. And that's the voice you think of as me or you, right? That's the voice you think of as you, but it's actually not. The second part of your mind is obviously your unconscious mind or your subconscious mind. And that's basically constantly absorbing billions of bits of information from the world around us. And all your brain does all day long is just ask questions and then try and answer them. So what's that? Oh, it's a table. What's that? It's a chair. Who's that? Oh, it's Johnny. What's that? Oh, it's a camera. Who's that? Oh, what's that? Oh, it's a light.
Sounds
so
like my son.
All your subconscious mind is why? Yeah. And so one of the best ways to think about your unconscious mind is imagine somebody's given you an afternoon to do nothing, and they've given you 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. So you dump all the pieces onto the ground, and you separate them out into corners and edges and the rest of them. And you start with the corners and the edges, because that gives you a border and that gives you a framework. And we as humans like to have structure and framework. So you create that. And then you start putting together the pieces. And your subconscious mind is constantly just taking pieces of inspiration from around you and trying to put them together like a jigsaw puzzle. And sometimes they fit and sometimes they don't. And you just have to keep going. And then when you're halfway through the puzzle this afternoon, somebody comes in with a bucket and they dump another 1,000 pieces on the floor. And they say, by the way, you've got to make all of those fit into the jigsaw puzzle as well. And the reason this happens is that your brain can only focus on its frame of reference, what it thinks of you and the world around you. But the problem is it's trying to make sense of it based on its stubborn attempt to remain sane at the same time as you're being bombarded by other information. So you're constantly hearing somebody else on the news telling you something that contradicts something you fundamentally believed since you were a kid. And then somebody tells you a joke, which is nothing more than a meaningless distraction, but it's there and it has to fit into your frame of reference. And then something that was once acceptable is no longer PC, but that's how you've lived your entire life. And it's based on your frame of reference. Now that has to fit in as well. So your unconscious mind is battling with all this stuff all the time. And it's just handing bits of information back to your conscious mind. And I hate to reduce us down to being this simple, but your conscious mind just takes the surface level end result of all of that confusion, and it says, oh, I must be stupid, or I must go to the shop and I must get some potatoes, or I must do this. And what we're finishing up with is the real surface level result of all of this complexity that's happening below the surface. So as a hypnotist, what happens is I get to distract somebody's conscious mind. And if you have seen a hypnotist before, you'll see them do things like lock everybody's hands together, or they'll do some sort of what they call a suggestibility test. What that's actually designed to do is partly to find out who's the most suggestible and who's going to be the best hypnotic subject. But it's also just to distract the conscious brain. If you think about it like a bouncer outside a nightclub, and you want to sneak in when you're 17 and not 18, or when you're 20 and not 21 in the States, and you have to distract the bouncer so that you can sneak around them and get into the nightclub secretly. What a hypnotist does is to distract the bouncer, the conscious mind, the bit that's constantly thinking this won't work, or crossing your arms and thinking, come on then, hypnotize me, has to distract that part of the brain so that they can sneak into the unconscious mind and start to plant seeds, throw down jigsaw pieces that say, when you hear this piece of music, you'll be this, and try and make that fit into a frame of reference. Now, because they are relatively outlandish things, like you're going to be a pop star, you're going to speak like an alien, you're going to think you're on holiday, whatever, they're obviously quite short-lived. They're kind of like somebody just throwing a little joke and a punchline into that mess. But that's basically what's happening. It's all about distracting the conscious mind so you can sneak in the back door into the unconscious mind, and then you can start to really play with actually what we fundamentally believe. You get to play with the information that's being passed back to the conscious mind, which is why when you ask a lot of people who've taken part in the stage hypnosis show, some of them will say, I was just playing along. Some of them will be. There's nothing that you can do about that. Some of them, however, will say, I knew what I was doing, and I knew it was weird or wrong or stupid, but I just couldn't stop myself from doing it. And much like bad habits, dodgy behaviors that we want to get rid of, negative thinking, the stuff that we don't like about ourselves, the stuff we want to improve about ourselves, a lot like that. It's wrong. It's a bad habit. You shouldn't bite your nails or flick snots at the wall. You shouldn't do the bad habit, but you just sort of can't help it. And it's all because it's ingrained in us on a subconscious level. And again, all our conscious mind is getting is what that passes forward. So if that passes forward, when you hear this piece of music, you're going to be Elvis, the body but can't help but respond to that, because that's what's being programmed in. Does that make sense?
That's one of the best explanations I've ever heard. That was absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.
I just find it terrifying that human beings are so open to suggestion. I didn't think we was. I didn't think we was that open to suggestion. That is terrifying to think of that. I mean, some of the stuff you said there, I mean, it's stuff that I deal with on a day-to-day basis with myself and other people. And that is the things like the negative thinking and the unhelpful behaviors that we have and the unhelpful habits that we have. So I suppose what interests me most about this is I'm always trying to think and get my head around tools of how to help people, and obviously self-development podcast. And obviously people they can't hypnotize themselves. Well, I don't know. They can't hypnotize themselves, can they?
Not exactly.
No.
It's a bit more complex than that. Yeah.
No. So, but how can hypnotism be used in a way of improving someone's life in general? What sort of things have you seen that have really maybe surprised you, or you thought has been a really incredible result?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I don't do any sort of clinical hypnotherapy work, but there's a big debate between stage hypnotists and clinical hypnotherapists. And there are some people who do both. So there's some people who will go out on a Saturday night and they'll do stage hypnosis, and they probably got into it to do stage hypnosis. And then they'll see clients during the day because honestly, it's just an extra revenue stream. Yeah. And then there'll be other hypnotherapists. Like I've spoken at hypnotherapy conferences and stuff as a stage hypnotist because they wanted a stage hypnotist's perspective. Because it seems and feels like quite a different thing. And some hypnotherapists have gone as far as going, actually, I'd quite like to get up on stage and have a go at this. I've been doing it in the therapy room for a long time. I'd like to have a go on stage. And so I would argue that there's really no difference. They're both a performance to some extent. So in both instances, there's quite a lot of sort of ritualistic mystique built around them. So when you go and see a hypnotist in a theater, you get to my show and there's 12 chairs out on the stage and you think, oh, there's people going to be sat in those chairs tonight.
That would scare the hell out of me.
It might be me. It might be that person. It might be my wife. It might be whoever. So that's the first bit. And then, and when you go to a therapy room, you turn up and you made an appointment, and you've maybe paid a deposit or paid in full, depending on who you go and see. And you get there, and there's a person you've never met before. And even if you're quite confident, that's going to make you nervous because you don't know what's going to happen. There's always like a sense of mystique around it. And when you get there, they tell you what's going to happen, and they tell you you're going to sit down, and this is what hypnosis is, and this is roughly how it works. And on stage, the same thing happens. I'm going to tell you that, what you're going to go through. Then you'll be relaxed and hypnotized, and you'll be relaxed and hypnotized on stage or in the therapy room. Then you'll be filled with suggestions, either to quit smoking, lose weight, overcome the habit, get more confident or whatever, or to dance around like some pop star. And at the end of it, you wake up feeling refreshed and feeling good and feeling reinvigorated. The only difference is that they've spent an hour or 90 minutes or 2 hours filling you with basically one suggestion from a million different perspectives. And it's a suggestion for something you want to happen for a lifelong change. And therefore it's going to be more deeply embedded, versus lots of short, sharp, fast things that happen on stage, but fundamentally sort of the same process. And so when you get to realize that actually thoughts and beliefs affect our behaviors, they affect our outcomes, they affect everything we do. If you can get in and play with what your subconscious wiring is doing on stage to become Elvis for 3.5 minutes, you can make any change on earth, more or less. So, I mean, there are some hypnotists who, in my opinion, have taken this too far and said that, and they've really suggested, and obviously there's always cutting edge science on this stuff, but they're suggesting that you can make changes I don't believe you can make, like physical changes to your body and that kind of thing. For me, that's a step too far and becomes a bit of a scam. But in terms of like changing behaviors and beliefs, anything is possible. Because just like anybody could get into a piece of software and, with a software developer could get in and reprogram a piece of software to act and behave the way you want it to act, the same thing can happen with our brains, because fundamentally it's just wiring, programming. It's just taking stuff that's been fed in over time from our childhood onwards, most of which is outside of our control, that forms our beliefs about us and the world and our place within it, and then allowing that to come out. Now, the good news is that you don't need to use hypnosis to do it. So there's a lot of stuff that I do on stage that actually doesn't require any hypnosis. The whole first bit of my show is just figuring out who's going to be in the show, like who wants to volunteer, and of those people, who am I actually going to work with, because I've only got limited space and time. And what I'm doing there is sort of what we call suggestibility tests. It's activities to figure out how open is your brain, because on stage, obviously it's got to be funny, and obviously it's got to be fast, and obviously it's got to be entertaining. And therefore I'm looking for like the natural stars of the show. Even if you might not think they are to meet them, they might be shy and retiring in real life. Their brain is wired up and ready to go. In real life, though, what we're looking to do is just to make small tweaks and changes over a period of time to literally train a behavior and become more and more open to being able to make these changes. And so you can actually just use our natural suggestibility, which, and it's interesting, people say it's terrifying how suggestible we are, but actually the more suggestible you are, the more likely you are to learn, the more likely you are to improve, the bigger facility you've got to like take steps forward. If you're not suggestible and you're not open at all, and you're really not looking to do all of that, actually change is much more difficult. So I think being suggestible is a really good thing if what we want to do is to step forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, something that really struck me there, because it's something that I believe is fundamental for a lot of self-development, is that willingness.
Right.
Because I know if someone wants to go to therapy, but their partner's making them go, or somebody else is making them go. Same with this as coaching. If you're reluctant, then it kind of doesn't matter what we do. You're not going to be open to it. You're gonna like kick that back to me. You're not going to give it. Same with when I used to be a PT. I'd have a lot of the time somebody's partner would pay for them to come, and they would walk through the door and they'd be like grumpy and annoyed. It's like, they're not going to have fun. They're not going to do the exercise. It's not going to happen. So that's what really struck me about that, is that willingness. There has to be that willingness. And I think, for everybody that's listening to a self-development podcast, I suspect that they are open and willing to self-development. So that's really intriguing, that. Idea.
I think it's a combination of willingness and permission. I think a lot of the time we don't give ourselves permission to think that, like, oh, well, sure, that person had this big breakthrough and changed their life, but I bet I can't do that. And it's actually just about giving ourselves permission, or having somebody like you work with them in a room to give them permission a lot of the time.
That's interesting you say that, because when you said permission, I thought you meant me giving permission to you, say, but you actually mean permission to yourself. That's a really interesting point.
Yeah, I really think a lot of people just stand in the way and say, yeah, that's okay, because that person, I see that person, the self-development's for them. I get it. I see why they made a big change. I can't do that.
Yeah, no, you're right. Absolutely. Yeah. It's honestly really fascinating stuff, man. I can't quite believe what I'm hearing. It's like almost like a bit too much information. I'm like, whoa, Johnny's brain's shutting down. It's crazy. And is there any sort of like real difference between stage and clinical, or is it just literally the environment?
For me, it's just the environment that creates a bit of an argument between stage and hypnotherapists. A lot of the time, hypnotherapists have been trained out. They think that stage hypnosis is bad and damaging because it's humiliating or whatever, which just means they've seen terrible hypnotists, in my opinion. But I think or badly executed anyway. So I think, yeah, for me, it's the same thing, just with a different outcome.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And yeah, it just, yeah, it really does surprise me. Like, you know, the willingness, the permission thing, I'm still reeling from that. Very often our actions start as thoughts. If we don't like our thoughts, how do you feel we can transform our thoughts so that we might be able to be more helpful in everyday life?
So this is really interesting, because I think that thoughts are one of the things that trip people up the most. People, there's the old adage, isn't there? What is it? I think, therefore I am, or whatever. But I think people generally believe that they are their thoughts are them. Their thoughts make their personality, their characteristics, their habits, and their behaviors. Now, their thoughts can definitely lead towards those things, but they're not the same thing. You are not your thoughts, because that's why with a good argument and good debate, within minutes, you can completely change your mind about something. So if you're having a conversation with somebody and you put your sense of, you know, somebody asks you a question and you give them an opinion, and it's an opinion you formed in about the last 3.5 seconds, you've never really thought about it before. You're not lying to them. It's never crossed your mind. You've never debated it with yourself. You just give them an opinion. Do you like this? And you just say, yes. And they say, okay, great. And then they argue back at you why that's a terrible opinion, and they give you all this other stuff. And a minute and a half later, you've changed your mind and you say, oh, never mind. I hadn't thought it through properly. That happens quite a lot, unless you're really stubborn and you're going to just keep arguing with cognitive dissonance until you just blew in the face. But the reason that happens is our thoughts are just things that happen to us. Just like when you're walking down the street and a leaf blows off the street and smashes you on the head as it flies over, or something, you know, a dog runs up to you and jumps up at you. These are things that they're not part of you. They're nothing you're controlling. It's just happening to you. And so that's why thoughts are a very transitionary thing. Sometimes you can feel happy, sometimes you can feel sad. All feelings and all emotions initiate from how we think and what's going on around us. And so because these thoughts just happen to us, that means that we can really easily, if we choose to, if we give ourselves permission to, distance ourselves from the thought. And it sounds like a weird thing to do, but if you think something, or if you just notice yourself thinking something, so you feel a thought come into your brain, again, that's only the surface level result of all of this stuff that's gone on in your unconscious brain. All of the millions of bits of information have had to come together in order for you to think that you're stupid or fat or ugly or clever or brilliant or right or wrong, right? All of this other stuff has come together from this big messy jigsaw puzzle that's trying to just make sense of everything. But our conscious brain can only handle a couple of things at once. So it just gets handed the sort of really surface level stuff that we can deal with. And so that means that the thought is how you feel. It's based on how you feel at that moment in time. It's based on that one fleeting moment in time, but it doesn't stick. It doesn't have to be fixed. It doesn't mean anything unless we allow it to. And the problem is we usually just naturally allow it to. Well, I thought that, and therefore that must be what I think. That makes sense. I had that thought, and therefore I think that this. But actually, if you take some time to step away from it and look at it and go, but is that actually how I think? If I stop and debate it with myself, is that actually how I think? So for example, I live on the south side of the River Tyne, and my best friend lives on the north side of the River Tyne. So to get from one to the other, you either have to drive over a bridge or go under a tunnel. So imagine you're driving under the Tyne tunnel. You're in the tunnel for, I don't know, 1.5 miles or something. You drive under this thing and you go all the way down and all the way back up again. It takes you down under the River Tyne. I don't live in the tunnel. I'm just in the tunnel at that moment in time. I don't live on the Tyne Bridge when I drive over it. I'm just on it at that moment in time. And you can do exactly the same thing with your thoughts. I don't live with this thought. It's not fundamentally a piece of who I am. It's just a thing that happened to me at that moment in time, based on my frame of reference of the world, how I feel about it, and all of my past experience so far. And so what that means is that if you have a thought, if you're experiencing a thought, because that's actually what happens, you don't think, you just experience a thought. If you experience a thought that says, I'm not good enough, I can't do it, I'm in the wrong place, I don't belong here, I don't fit in, all of the things I talked about from my childhood and anything else, that's not a thought that you think, it's a thought that's happening to you at the time. And therefore you can stop to just say, actually, that's not actually true. Whereas if somebody comes along and paints a wall red, that wall is red. There's no way of getting around it. It's not blue, it's not black, it's not white, it's not yellow, it's red. That's an absolute fact. As opposed to the thought that comes into your head, I'm ugly. According to who? Based on what? Like the minute you step away from it, you go, there's not even enough information there to actually make a sentence. That's like saying I'm guilty. Guilty of what? By who? According to what law? So I think the first thing to do is to really understand that actually, if our thoughts are just things that happen to us and they're things we experience, in the same way that if somebody walks up to you in the street and punches you in the face, you can't say that that's anything about you. You can't say that's anything about your personality, your thing. They're just somebody completely unprovoked came up and punched you in the face. And thoughts come up and punch us in the face all the time.
Yeah.
And it's just whether we choose to accept it as, oh my God, that was my fault. If somebody just ran up to you on the street and punched you in the face, gave you a black eye, somebody you've never met before and hadn't done anything to provoke it, you wouldn't blame yourself. You would blame the lunatic who came up and punched you in the face. So you've got to look at actually what are all the environmental things and the stuff around us that gave me that thought. And then you can learn how to like build a better relationship with thoughts. Does that make sense?
It really does make sense. I mean, what I'm hearing there is it's not even the thought, it's the attachment and the identifying with the thought that causes the long-term like damage, issue, problem, whatever. That's
right.
It's like how people might get limiting beliefs about spiders. And then
Totally.
they have like an incidental moment. They watch their mother maybe or their father, and they notice they're scared of spiders. They've just learned that spiders are scary, so therefore they've just accepted and attached to that and gone, right, yeah, I'm scared of spiders.
100%.
It doesn't make sense otherwise, does it? Because you've got this tiny little spider. You're like, why are people afraid of it?
Yeah, especially in England, they don't really bite. They don't do anything.
Yeah.
The most they can do is run fast because they've got more legs than you.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's it.
So that's interesting. Yeah. So you see attaching and the identifying with it. Is it any tips for not attaching and identifying?
Yeah. So again, the first thing comes back to permission. The first thing comes back to the permission to say, actually, do you know what? And actually just putting the effort in, the permission and putting the effort in to say, I'm actually just going to pay more attention. So if you've ever been accused by anyone of not paying attention, like maybe your partner or somebody you work with or something, you've ever been accused of, just sitting there and going blank while they talk at you. The only way to fix that, if you're genuinely doing it, the only way to fix that is to put the effort in to pay more attention, is to say, okay, do you know what? When you're talking, I'm going to put my phone down. I'm not going to flick through Instagram. I'm actually going to listen. I'm going to be present. And so you can give yourself the same respect that you should give somebody else. You should give somebody else the respect to pay attention and listen. You should do that for yourself. Now, of course, it's hard because we're busy and we've got loads of stuff going on all the time and everybody's fighting for our attention. Facebook, for example, has, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of employees who are all much smarter than me, all desperately trying to take my attention away from me and show me dark, scary, horrible things or funny cats on hoovers or whatever. They're desperately trying to distract my attention. So that's hard. But just in the same way you would hopefully put the effort in to give somebody else your full attention, then you should put the effort into to give yourself that attention. You should put the effort in to say, I'm going to pay attention to when I say something like this. And sometimes you can get other people to help you with it. So when they ask people that when they notice you saying something that sounds like lunacy, like you're putting yourself down or you're something like that, tell them to caught and punch you in the face. No, tell them to to call you out on it and get them to but yeah, the first thing is just learning to pay attention to it. And when you learn to pay attention to it, you can basically unpick it like I did before in that example. I'm ugly. Well, according to who? Based on what? Oh, actually, that's based on what I perceive other people to think. Well, I don't have it's arrogant for me to think that I can believe I know what other people believe. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I can start to reframe that now and pay attention to it, and then you can distance yourself from it.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly, I run a course called Super Self, and there's a week where we talk about limiting beliefs, and I always ask people to clarify, challenge, and change. And it sounds like similar stuff, you know, like just getting people to challenge those things and then change them to what I call growth beliefs. So,
For sure.
I mean, that's fascinating. I've never heard it explained like that before. That's really quite good. When we were kids, we, you know, as we grow up, we sort of struggle to identify with what our purpose is, you know, like what do you want to be when you grow up? And there always seems to be this pressure. And I know adults that don't know what they want to be when they grow up. I mean, how do you get clarity on purpose, do you feel? Like what's the sort of route towards that?
I think the first thing is to rebel a little bit. So in this instance, I consider myself really lucky to somehow, and I can't quite explain this sadly, but somehow have not been brought up in a world where, or in an environment where the sort of the way of the world is forced on you. So most people tend to believe that we exist on earth, whether they admit this out loud or not. Most people believe that we exist on earth to serve the fact, we sort of exist here to serve other people, to serve the world, to serve a boss, to serve a thing, to work for a salary that was prescribed by somebody else, to look after the planet, as we're starting to realize wonderful, important things now, like, you know, global warming and that. But we should be looking at climate change, not just to save this incredible planet, but actually because we need it in order to sustain ourselves. We should be a bit more selfish about things. And then I think that would help the climate change thing. But I think we should, if we're all a bit more selfish about stuff, if we were a bit more us focused, and when I say selfish, I really mean selfish on behalf of you and your immediate circle of people that matter to you. So you and your partner or your kids or your parents or your best friends or your family or whatever. When I say selfish, I mean selfish on behalf of you and the people that you really care about, because ultimately what's good for them is good for you. What's good for you is good for them. So we should really be willing to actually say, do you know what? I'm here, and I know they say life is short, but actually we are here for quite a long time. Like, we might as well enjoy it while we're here. I think the first thing is to just question the fact that you don't have to just do stuff the way the way it's prescribed. Obviously, you've got to follow laws. It's a good idea to get an education. Aside from that, though, if you want to pursue a different path, if you want to do something that's different from the norm, then you definitely can. And the first step, I think, in finding clarity and purpose and figuring out what you want to do is to just detach yourself from the fact that you don't have to do what everybody else is going to want you to do. You don't have to. Everybody except my parents, when I was growing up, told me that I should go and get a, quotes, proper job and then try entertainment as like a side hustle. And then if it didn't work out, it doesn't matter because you've got a steady, proven income. And I was just lucky that my dad said to me, and my dad was self-employed as well, and he just said, take a gap year, see how it goes. Worst case scenario. And I was always trained to believe in, what's the worst case scenario? It's probably not as bad as you would initially think it's going to be. The worst case scenario for me would have been, I would have turned 19. I would still live with my parents and I'd have to go and get a proper job because the entertainment thing failed. That's the worst case scenario. Didn't have kids, wasn't married, didn't have any of those problems. And so I think for me, just a really big thing is to say it's perfectly okay to try loads of stuff. And some of it will work and some of it won't. Most of us, I believe, think that success is linear, that you get up, and successful people, like, for example, David Beckham must have, I mentioned at the beginning, he must have been spotted as a kid playing football, right? I know nothing about football, so this analogy might fall over.
Nor do I.
David Beckham must have been spotted very young, and then he soared up, became the world's greatest football player, and now he's David Beckham, right? And people look at it and they think, but that's what success is. And they do that because they look at the exceptions. It's easy to look at exceptions. There's exceptions in everything. It's easy to look at the people who are exceptional. But actually, what success is for most of us who are not going to be David Beckham or the equivalent in whatever it is that you're interested in, you're not going to be Freddie Mercury. You're not going to be the one. Success is happiness, fulfillment, being able to wake up every day and feel good, even if you're having a bad day, even if you're having a difficult day, even if you're going through a tough patch, to still feel good and like you're taking steps forward. For me, success is all inextricably linked with that. And so the best thing you can do is just experiment. I did loads of stuff. I did kids entertainment. I did a radio show in a Northeast radio station for a couple of years. I was a hypnotist, obviously. I'm a hypnotist. I did kids parties. I did magic at weddings. I did a mobile disco thing with my mate. We bought all this disco equipment, used to go and DJ at weddings and that kind of thing. I tried loads of stuff. I knew I wanted to be in the entertainment square somewhere, but I didn't know what that looked like. And at the time, I remember moving around, stumbling from thing to thing, thinking everyone around me had their stuff together and was just on this straight line up path. And I didn't realize that actually it's perfectly okay. I think it's better to just try loads of stuff, because that way you don't get to 50 and look back and go, oh my God, what have I done with the first over half of my life? What have I done with all that time? Why didn't I do stuff differently? Well, I know, because I tried loads of things. I know the stuff that I liked. I know the stuff that was fine at the time, but I definitely didn't want to pursue. I knew I didn't want to be a mobile DJ or a kids entertainer. I sort of found my groove, but the only way of doing it was to try loads of stuff and find that some of it didn't work. So the first thing is detach yourself from what life wants you to do, and then try loads of things that you think you might want to do. And you'll find something amongst them. It might take a while, and that's okay. As long as every time you find something that you don't like or you fail at, you've just taken one step closer to finding the thing that might give you clarity and purpose. So I hope that answers the question.
No, it does. It really does. I love that example as well. It's just you pulled off the football example. Well done. I would have never corrected you, because I don't do football either, so it would have been quite fun. But I mean, you mentioned there like happiness and fulfillment, and obviously you were very lucky. It sounds like you had like wonderful parents that really did nurture sort of what you wanted to do, and it makes so much sense about like detaching from life and working out what you want to do, what life's trying to point to you, not literally from life. That would be a bad idea. And you know, did it make you happy from the beginning, or is it something that you sort of worked your way towards, and how did you sort of find that happiness and fulfillment, do you think?
Yeah, so I think I was always happy, but I wasn't always fulfilled. I always felt like there was something missing all the way through that sort of journey that I talked about. I always felt, again, I was happy in the moment. I didn't feel like I fulfilled my potential. And if this is what every day is like, then I'm going to be on top of the world. Because I just felt like there was so much more to achieve, until I started to look at that thought much later in life, which was to say, actually, well, what is success? Because everybody says it's not a destination, because if it was, that would be really dissatisfying to get there. You'd get there and then look down and go, well, now I'm in front of a wall and I've got nowhere else I can go. So it's not that, and it has to therefore be a journey. So for me, in terms of creating happiness and fulfillment and a life that is those things, I think the first thing is to realize that actually the thing to find happiness and fulfillment in is the process of improving. It is the process of stepping forward. It is the process of trying a thing and failing, or trying a thing and succeeding but hating it, because that's a different thing. Or trying something, succeeding and loving it. Trying a thing, failing and thinking, well, I'm going to have another go because actually I failed and I really want to keep doing it. As an example, my like thing for this year, for 2022, my thing that I'm really pushing for is to just try loads of new hobbies. I realized recently, one of the things that I've never pursued is really a hobby, because the thing I do is such a hobby and a job at the same time, that I never feel like I'm working. But everybody from the outside says, oh, what have you been doing? I say, oh, just working. And they think that's the saddest thing alive. And for me, that's great. But I realized it does mean I don't have anything to detach myself from work. So I've decided, I've made a list of things. And so they include things like, I want to try golf. Never picked up a golf club before until 2 weeks ago. So I want to try that. I want to try ice skating, just because I've done it like twice in my life or 3 times in my life and really enjoyed it. I want to learn to play the piano just for enjoyment. I love musical theatre. So I just want to learn to play music. I don't want to be able to read sheet music and play classical stuff. Just learn to play musical theatre songs and that sort of stuff. And all of that, none of it's designed to be super successful or to get somewhere. It's all purely because I want to try something. And you know what? I said to my friend who plays golf, who I went to the driving range with a few weeks ago, I said, look, just to let you know, I'm going to be awful at this, because I'm notoriously terrible at anything that involves hitting something with something else. I'm going to, like, PE at school is not my thing. I'm going to be awful at this, but I don't care. I don't care if at the driving range you've got 12 people in a row and they're all looking and thinking, why is he here? Because he's hopeless. I don't care. I don't want to be good. I just want to enjoy myself. And I think if people can find the disconnect between success, like a successful outcome, and fulfillment and happiness, the world would be such a happier place. So there's for sure, there has to be stuff you're good at. There has to be stuff that you can do. There has to be a way you can earn a living. There has to be a job that you're good at. There has to be a business you're good at. There has to be, for me, my show I have to be good at, and I have to be constantly striving to improve that. There has to be stuff you're good at. But there doesn't mean you have to be good at everything. Some stuff you can just do purely for the fulfillment of it. And if you get that balance of stuff right, then you get, and you're willing to just every day step forward and try and be a little bit less crap than you were yesterday, then that really, really helps. And then that way you can, if the end of your life sadly comes at any point out of the blue, as it could, just to go a bit morbid for a second, the last day that you lived was fulfilled and happy. It might not be the big successful outcome you once pictured. You might not have got there. You might not have had time. That was outside of your control. Somebody might have come and punched you too hard in the face. And that was outside of your control, but at least the last day you had would have been fulfilled.
Oh man, you have got a really quite exceptional perspective. I love that. And you can really see how, like, even with children, sometimes not even meaning to, you can really sort of almost beat the you must be good at this into them. It's like they can't just go and have fun and enjoy it. You'll see sometimes kids and you're like, why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? And it's because they're having fun. Like, that's their objective. It's like, I thought this was supposed to be fun. No, you're supposed to be good at it.
Right.
I've seen that in the park. You go down the park and some chaps telling their son they got to kick it like this, you got to do that, and the kid's just having fun with it. He doesn't want to be a footballer. He's just enjoying that moment. So I can really see that. It makes a lot of sense, and I suspect that will resonate with a lot of people, that statement. I love that a lot. Random question, like, what's one of the greatest lessons you think you've learned in life?
I think it's to explore stuff with curiosity rather than a sense of either feeling like I don't know anything and therefore I shouldn't, or the feeling of I know everything and therefore I'll just go for it. I think every single thing you do and everything you encounter and everyone you come across, you should approach that interaction with that person or that thing with a sense of, I wonder what if this happens, because there's nothing to be frightened of then. Going back to kids, there's so many things that kids do that I think we should all, as grown-ups, I think we should all go back and start doing again. So like if a kid sees a wall that's really high and they've never walked along that wall before, they'll walk along the wall and they'll have a go because they want to know what happens if I walk along that wall. And then they'll see a different wall and they'll go, oh, but I haven't walked across that wall. That wall might be different to the first wall. I'll try that one. And they'll run across and they'll jump on that one and they'll walk along that one. Why? They want to know what happens if I go on that wall. What happens if I do that? And sometimes those things result in them doing stuff at school or naughty stuff they shouldn't do. They get told off. What happens if I put a drawing pin on the teacher's seat? What happens if I do this? What happens if I do that? Now, of course, as grown-ups, we know where the line is to know where we shouldn't. Okay, well, you can't put a drawing pin on somebody's seat. That's you can't do that. But we should approach the things we do with that sense of what if, because then you don't have fear of anything anymore, because you're not going, oh, what if this happens? And what if that happens? And what if I fall over? And what if it's terrible? And what if everyone laughs at me? Instead, you go, oh, but what might happen if I do that? And it's the same question, just asked differently. So I think just approach everything with a sense of curiosity and a spirit of what might I achieve? What might happen? What good things might come out of that if I did it?
Yeah, I think it's this. I always have this conversation with people where I say you can think a feeling into a problem, because it's like you have that feeling, don't you? And then it's actually not the feeling that you're having. Maybe it's I don't know, disappointment. You would then turn that disappointment into something that is actually a problem, and it never actually happened. It's
100%.
like I saw it happen with someone a little while ago where they turned loneliness, and they went from the feeling of loneliness to I've got no friends, I am worthless, what's the point? And it went from I feel a bit lonely all the way to that in almost seconds. And actually how do you get there otherwise? It's just insane. What advice would you give yourself of 10 years ago, do you think? It sounds like you've had such a storied life. And I think, you spoke about, or even longer back than that, you spoke about that child that didn't feel that they fitted in. And I see the man that stands in front of me, and, he's obviously somebody who has had a varied life. And I would imagine, do you feel like you fit in now? or do you just
not at all, but I sort of embrace it. Like it's one of those things. I've got great friends, a small group of really great friends. I get on with most people. It's rare that I'd have a bad interaction with somebody. And if you do, that's probably says more about them than it does about you. That's okay as well. So no, I don't feel like I fit in anymore. But I guess the advice would be to that 5-year-old or that 24-year-old 10 years ago, whatever, would have been, that's perfectly okay. Yeah. Because first of all, I think most people feel like they don't fit in. Loads of people feel like they don't fit in. Loads of people feel like they're different. Loads of people go through life feeling like they're a little bit of an outcast and they don't really know what their place in the world is. And And therefore it doesn't really matter. Like, nobody wants to be a clone of anybody else. What's the point in that? If we were all just the same, if we were all just like those little characters from Shrek who all, God, that little kingdom, like if we're all just identical little people, what would be the point in that? Nobody would interact with anybody else. And that sounds simplistic when you put it like that. When you just say, well, you know, if we're all this, it sounds like feel good mumbo jumbo, doesn't it? Well, if we were all the same, the world would be boring. But it would be boring.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Nobody would form meaningful interactions or relationships because, well, they'd be the same as you, and the world would just fall apart. So go out and be different. Be as different as you can be, and find your place. It doesn't have to fit in.
Yeah, I mean, what the question that sprung to mind there was like, you know, if you feel that you don't fit into what? You know,
Exactly.
like you said, it's that curiosity, isn't it? It's that asking more questions, which is like what coaching is basically, is asking questions. And I always say that you ask why 5 times, you'll get to the bottom of something, because it's usually around about the third why they say, oh, because it is. And you're like, oh, that feels like a house built on grass.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things where I think if you did fit in, right, if you really did fit in and you found that everybody was just the same, and that, I think you'd be really deeply dissatisfied.
Yeah, really good point. Really, really good point. Mate, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. It's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for this. Tell people what's next for you and a little bit about where they can find you. And I believe you have a podcast as well. Is that right?
Yeah, so I sort of, when lockdown happened, obviously the entertainment industry sort of just shut down and we stopped being able to perform, especially me. I'm quite a close contact thing. You've got lots of people on stage and that kind of stuff. So when the pandemic happened, I just sort of stopped performing and just sort of focused on all of this interesting stuff, really. So I started a podcast, currently taking a pause from that. I've moved to a YouTube channel instead. So it's just called Success Unlocked. If you go to successunlocked.com, you'll find weekly YouTube videos. It's quite early in development yet, but there's some cool stuff there. So successunlocked.com, you can check out my YouTube stuff, get on my list if you want to, and yeah, have more of this in your life.
Mate, absolutely brilliant. As I said, this has been fascinating. I've taken a lot from it. You've actually thrown me quite a lot. I'm usually a lot more inquisitive and got loads of questions and ideas, but I've been reeling the whole time. I've been talking from all the things you said.
Thing, but
no, it is
cool.
a good thing, and I'm really grateful for it. So thank you so much for your time. And just as you say, go and check you out. I think that what you're doing is exceptional, and I believe by listening to you that this is the beginning of something. I really do. I think it's the beginning of something that's going to grow into something really quite special. So thank you again for your time. And I got you on the podcast early doors. I'm happy about that.
Cheers, man. I appreciate it.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.